talked about funding the 2.2 for fire. Is that going to come out of the Housing Trust Fund, or are we going to pull that? Are we going to reduce their increase of the 4.8 by the 2.2 and set that aside?
Where you guys were recommending it, where were you going to take it from?
There is only one place, the Housing Trust Fund.
Yes.
Correct.
Well, I think we need to do it. I'm going to delegate that responsibility. From my point of view, I mean, it's not my recommendation that came. It's from the fire chief. So I got to figure out, or you all have to figure it out. I don't know.
Well, it was
support on the council to do it. We do things all the time that we don't know where the money is coming from.
It will come from the Housing Trust Fund, Vice Mayor, if it's approved.
I don't know what defunding means. I know I'm not for it because I do believe we need a strong police department that is reform-minded. I know that we need to shift calls from the police and the fire departments, frankly, to a new way of doing business. The Department of Community Response, we're committed to that, and that's going to take some time. I am for taking every new dollar we gain, either through revenue growth or through federal or state assistance, and to put most of that money into the community, the same way we did with CARES, the same way we have done with the second half of Measure U, as evidenced by the document that I just cited. But why can't we do that and at the same time add 5 positions to the police department for doing better background checks so that we can make sure that we're hiring officers who don't have a bad record? Why can't we hire 5 new officers?
I think that the manager's proposed budget is a good one. And I would like to move that we accept it as it is without defunding anything from either the police or the fire budget.
There is some concern that, every time we talk about the police department this last 6 months, we've created a really huge division in our city because we represent each other's districts. And we've creating this massive gap between police department, our community, and we're sending the wrong signals. No city can operate without the police department. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. And no city can be operating without a fire department. Do they need some reform and policies? Absolutely. But we really need to, I think we need to get off on this high horse of let's take money from them and push it on this side. Because the data is not in that's going to actually improve our community. There's some districts, I represent District 2. No, we need more police, plain and simple.
Certainly in District 3, the number of guns that the police have taken off the streets and what those guns represent, which is a lot of violence of people against people. I think it would be very unwise to take anything away from the police budget at this point.
Oftentimes, even in community conversations that I'm part of on the ground, oftentimes gun violence and fear is often used to shut down our ability to truly imagine public safety, right? And so first, I just want to say for the residents that have called in who have asked us not to defund the police, I want to share with you that I know it's really hard to reimagine a world that we all haven't lived in, right? So many of us have become reliant on law enforcement, but I just want to say I truly believe that together we could really imagine, based on facts, an evidence-based approach to invest in programs and communities that do increase the quality of life for our families. If we look at data, right, because I've been looking at some studies at Stanford, a few studies by university, a lot of the conclusion tells us that increasing police funding increasing police funding does not actually make our community safe. And we know through research that tells us that having more cops doesn't mean less crime. In another study that I read, even if you were to control the spending for population too, right? Let's say we had, because folks are, what I'm also hearing on the other side is that, we have a population increase, it's the ratio from police officers to individuals. But even if you were to control for population two, there's still no significant correlation between spending in the police department to overall violent crime rates, right? And that is fact and evidence. So I wanted to be able to put that on record. I do believe there is a better model for public safety that really is about strengthening communities and investing in social safety nets. Now that is incumbent upon the city and the county, right? And I will share again, the county gets dollars for health services and criminal justice, right? And so we also have to hold the county accountable to that. City has a responsibility. Police falls under our jurisdiction, but I do believe that there is a better model out there. And I'll share this as a kid growing up, born and raised in Sacramento. I grew up in Oak Park and Meadowview. And what I will share with you is that firsthand, as a child, I will share with you that for me, having more officers necessarily didn't mean that I felt safe. And I remember, walking back from Sac High, seeing broken swings on playgrounds, seeing sidewalks that weren't safe, lack of lighting on our streets, right? And for me, there's just so much need in our community. I think for me, a police reduction plan is really about refunding vital services for our cities and investment in communities that have suffered decades of disinvestment. And so for me, I really am taking a public health approach to this and really thinking if we really want to reduce crime, I think the first thing we need to do is really figure out what's associated with that crime. And that means addressing it upstream. And oftentimes that means it's because of poverty, it's disinvestment in families and communities. And so I think, it's very ironic that, when we started this city council meeting today, we voted on supporting a resolution to talk about reparations, right? And when we think about the history of law enforcement in this country, it is built from a racist system. And I think that's something that all of us need to acknowledge.
We listened to hours of testimony, and it's both healthy and I am concerned that the community is talking way past each other here. And I suppose it is predictable given the times that we are living in. What is new under the sun? It's the chief's job, both chiefs' job, to advocate for their departments. It's the community's job on both sides to advocate for one vision or another, and it's up to us to be fair, to listen, and to govern.
The chief painted a really devastating, bleak a picture for us about how he would choose to address that reduction in funding. But we've got to be able to imagine the bleak picture of someone who loses a loved one to preventable violence or untreated mental illness, or because they don't have housing. This is a real choice we're making. And if we can prevent someone from having to call 911, that's really what safety is about. That's calling 911 isn't, you don't feel safe when you're calling 911, something's wrong. And I think we need to find a better balance. A $30 million increase in 2 budgets is substantial. And especially when our communities and our businesses and our youth just need so much in order to recover from this pandemic. And I know it's super tempting to say, oh, but the American Recovery Act funding, but I know of requests that are already beyond double what we're going to have from the American Recovery Act funding. And so we have to be honest with ourselves about that too, because we will have to make choices in that process. If we don't free up money in this budget to address the triage, to address the urgent issues, we are going to have to choose between whether the business community is going to get the support they need, or whether the youth will get all of the support they need, or whether we'll be able to fully fund the master plan that we've been working on for homelessness. And that's not a choice that I feel good about, which is why I'm so opposed to the increase in funding during a pandemic, during all these times.
We could take the money, the increases out of police and fire, move it to the citywide and community support budget. The budget stays whole. But as Lainey explained, we will, at mid-year, if we haven't done something to actually reduce their, FTE, which is where the chief has explained are the majority of their costs, then they will be over budget at the time we come back at mid-year. So that we have it for the record.
Oh, boy, I'm afraid too, but.
I think it's simple.
Okay.
It's two.
Dawn, it's staff's it's staff's recommendation, but it includes the diversity component for the fire department. And right now, Councilmember Harris is going to tell you what of Councilmember Chenier's proposals he's accepting. That's it.
Finance Director, do you have the information you need?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the 2.2 and the 170 will be in the budget resolution. The lighting, the youth and the youth cabinet will be follow-up items for the city manager.
Yes,
And the
that's
question
correct.
is whether the equity language in the reso is standing and we're going to add additional follow-up, or are we changing to Councilmember Chenier's equity language he read in?
Dawn, you need to circle up with Howard on the last piece. Okay. Yes, Mindy.
Thank you. Councilmember Laloe.
I'm a concerned community member, and I'm the daughter of Donald Venerable, which I hope is a name that sounds familiar. And if you don't know, on February 9th, 2001, Donald Venerable called your beloved police department for help. And in return, he was murdered for holding a cell phone that was mistaken for a gun. And so now that was 20 years ago. And since then, my family has actually fought for reform. And 20 years later, we are still experiencing a lot of violence in the community and abuse of power from police departments, especially Sacramento Police Department. And the city of Sacramento is definitely responsible for murdering my father. And it would really be a shame if y'all turned around and increased the police budget while understanding the harm and fear and violence that they have caused to the community, and especially communities of color.
To address the council, to ask you guys to please not invest more money into our police department. Please don't invest more money into criminalizing mental health. Please invest this money instead into things that our community actually needs. Please consider cutting the Sacramento Police Department's budget by no less than $30 million to restore the department to the 2019-2020 spending level. I'd like to see the council committing to another decrease next year and the year after that and the year after that. For the past year, I've personally observed how the excesses and overreach of the Sacramento Police Department harm Black and brown.
Concern for the lack of funding that is being given to the community response team and how much funding is actually going to the Sacramento Police Department. In the last year, as a physician, as a resident in Midtown, I have unfortunately witnessed the worst of the effects of the pandemic, both in terms of the patients I've had to take care of, the homeless situation in Midtown, which has exponentially worsened, at least within the last year, and as well as the lack of resources for mental health and appropriate resources for the community that does not have access to proper mental health or medical services.
So this statement is in adamant opposition to any reductions to the Sacramento Police Department budget. The expectations of the people of the city of Sacramento upon electing you to your offices were that they would have a safe atmosphere to live, do business, and recreate. However, statistically, we don't stand a chance to recognize that.
Because of time restraints, I'm just going to put it plainly. SACPD will never serve the true needs of our community. So why do we fund them like they do? They will never have the capacity to address the real core issues that lead to violence and crime in our communities. So why are they prioritized like they will? SACPD will not and could not ever take the place of fundamental community programs for the youth, for mental health, for the arts, for schools, for unhoused, for housing, and for job creation and building infrastructure. So once again, I'm asking, why do we fund them like they do? If you want to talk about public safety, let's get into that. The uniform crime reporting statistics presented by SACPD for this year from January to April shows the most reported crimes are largely assaults, robberies, larcenies. While murders and rapes are more likely to go unreported, it still begs the question, couldn't all these crimes be prevented by investing in community services instead of police? The police did not stop any of those murders or thefts, so why do we fund them like they did? I urge you, City Council members, to go door to door in neighborhoods like Oak Park, Meadowview, North Highlands, Arden Arcade, Del Paso Heights, South Sac, Rosemont, and tell them that you believe a cop is more beneficial to their neighborhood than a teacher or a social worker or a youth organizer or a mental health advocate.